Sometimes the hardest feelings to express are the strongest ones, not because someone doesn't know how they feel, but because they're afraid of what might change if they say it out loud. That's why love isn't always revealed through big confessions or dramatic gestures. More often, it shows up in small, everyday moments that are easy to overlook. If you've ever wondered whether a man has deeper feelings than he's willing to admit, there are a few quiet behaviors that tend to appear long before the words do. And the first one is probably the easiest to miss. Number 1. He finds reasons to stay connected without calling it romantic. At first, it doesn't seem like much. He sends you a funny video, a song he thinks you'll like, a photo of something that reminded him of a conversation you had weeks ago. Sometimes it's just a simple, "How did your meeting go?" or "Did you ever get your phone fixed?" None of those messages sound romantic. If someone else read them, they probably wouldn't think twice. But that's exactly what makes them easy to miss. I've noticed something about people who are trying to hide how much they feel. They rarely stop thinking about the person. They simply become more careful about how they show it. So instead of saying, "I've been thinking about you all day," they'll send a meme. Instead of saying, "I wanted an excuse to talk to you," they'll ask a question they could easily have answered themselves. The message isn't really about the meme or the question or the photo. It's about staying connected without making that connection feel obvious. I think most of us have done something similar at some point. You see something that instantly reminds you of one person. For a second, you hesitate. Should I send this? Then you convince yourself it's just a funny video, or I'm only asking because I was curious. But deep down, you know that wasn't the real reason. The real reason was much simpler. You wanted to be part of their day. And sometimes that desire quietly says more than a romantic message ever could. One thing I've always found interesting is this. When someone genuinely has feelings for you, you don't only appear in their conversations, you begin appearing in their ordinary moments. They're walking through a supermarket and something reminds them of you. They hear a song in the car and immediately wonder if you'd like it. They pass a restaurant and remember you once said you wanted to try it. Those moments aren't planned. They happen automatically because that's what emotional attachment quietly does. It changes what catches your attention. I've heard people say, "If he really liked me, he'd just tell me." Sometimes that's true, but feelings aren't always the difficult part. Vulnerability is. For some people, admitting how much someone means to them feels incredibly risky, not because they're playing games, not because they enjoy being mysterious, because saying those words means accepting that the other person could reject them, and that's a frightening place to stand. So they choose the safer option. They stay close without explaining why they want to stay close. The difficult part is that these moments are easy to dismiss. You tell yourself, he's probably just being friendly. Maybe he is. No single behavior can tell you exactly how someone feels. That's important to remember. People send thoughtful messages for many different reasons. The difference isn't one message, it's the pattern. When someone consistently finds small reasons to step back into your day without needing anything in return, it's worth paying attention to, because genuine feelings often reveal themselves through quiet consistency long before they ever become spoken words. And I've noticed something else. The more someone cares about you, the more carefully they listen, not just to the important things, to the little things most people forget by the next day. And that's where the next sign quietly begins.
Number 2. He notices small things other people forget. I've always thought this is one of the quietest signs that someone has become emotionally important to you. Not because they have a perfect memory, but because your attention changes when your feelings do. Think about it. You're talking one afternoon, and almost without thinking, you mention your favorite ice cream, or a book you loved as a child, or the fact that you've been nervous about an interview next Thursday. The conversation moves on. You probably forget you even said it. Then, weeks later, he casually asks, How did that interview go? For a second, you're caught off guard, not because it was a big secret, because you didn't expect him to remember. I've noticed moments like that often stay with people far longer than expensive gifts or grand romantic gestures, because remembering something small quietly tells you something much bigger. It tells you, when you were speaking, I was really listening. I think that's something we all underestimate. Listening isn't just hearing someone's words, it's deciding, without realizing it, that those words matter enough to stay with you. The funny thing is, these moments usually aren't planned. He isn't sitting there trying to memorize everything you say. He simply remembers. Because when someone begins occupying your thoughts, the little details stop feeling little. They become connected to the person. Maybe you're walking through a grocery store together, and he reaches for the snack you once mentioned liking. Not because you asked, because somewhere along the way, that small detail stayed with him. Or you're having a difficult week, and he remembers you said this time of year is always stressful because of work. You never reminded him. You didn't have to. He already knew. I've always found that fascinating, because people often think love reveals itself through dramatic moments. Sometimes it reveals itself through memory. Not perfect memory, human memory. The kind that quietly holds on to the things attached to someone who matters. Of course, it's important to be realistic here. Anyone can remember one detail. Anyone can have a good memory. One moment doesn't tell you how someone feels. What matters is the pattern. Over time, you notice he remembers the things most people let disappear. The coffee you always order, the name of your brother, the story about your grandmother that you only told once, the song you skipped because it reminded you of someone. None of those details are life-changing, but together they paint a picture. Not of someone trying to impress you, of someone who's been paying attention all along. I think that's the difference. People who are trying to impress you often remember the obvious things. People who genuinely care often remember the things you never expected anyone to notice. And perhaps that's because love has a quiet way of changing what feels worth remembering. I've heard people say, it's just a good memory. Maybe sometimes it is. But I've also noticed this. When someone remembers the little pieces of your life, it's often because those little pieces have slowly become part of theirs, without either of you realizing it. And as meaningful as that is, there's another moment that's even more revealing. It's the moment everything feels completely normal until the conversation suddenly becomes personal. Because that's where confidence often gives way to something much more honest.
Number 3. He looks comfortable until the moment it becomes personal. This one is easy to overlook, mostly because everything feels normal until one small moment changes the conversation. He's relaxed around you, he jokes, he teases you. The conversation flows naturally. Or are you two dating? Or maybe a friend jokingly says, you two would make a good couple. For a brief moment, everything changes. He laughs, looks away, changes the subject, or suddenly becomes unusually quiet. It's a small reaction, so small that most people forget it within seconds. But I've always found those moments interesting, because they often reveal the difference between casual interest and feelings that suddenly feel exposed. I've noticed something about people who are trying to hide how much someone means to them. They're usually comfortable until the conversation asks them to acknowledge those feelings out loud. That's when confidence quietly disappears, not because the feelings aren't real, because now they're visible. Imagine the two of you are sitting together after spending the afternoon talking. You've laughed, shared stories, everything feels effortless. Then you ask a simple question. Can I ask you something? He smiles. Sure. Why do you always make time for me? There's a pause, not a long one, just enough to notice. He laughs softly, looks down for a second, then says something like, I don't know, I guess I just enjoy hanging out with you. Maybe that's true. Maybe that's all it is. Or maybe there was a much bigger answer that never quite made it to the surface. I've always believed hesitation can be surprisingly revealing. Not because hesitation proves someone is in love. It doesn't. People hesitate for all kinds of reasons. The important thing is when they hesitate. Someone who can confidently talk about work, family, friends, their plans, and almost anything else, but suddenly struggles when the conversation turns toward how they feel, may not be struggling with their emotions. They may be struggling with the vulnerability of expressing them. And I think there's a difference. Feelings are private. Admitting them makes them real. Once they're spoken, they can be accepted, rejected, misunderstood, or change the relationship forever. That's a frightening possibility for someone who deeply values what already exists. So instead of risking everything, they choose the safer conversation. They joke, they smile, they redirect, not because they want to deceive you, because uncertainty feels easier than rejection. The difficult part is, from the outside, those moments can look like confidence or indifference, when in reality, they're sometimes the exact opposite. I've heard people say, if he really cared, he'd just tell me. Sometimes he would, sometimes he wouldn't. Human beings aren't always held back by lack of feeling. Quite often, they're held back by fear. Fear of hearing, I don't feel the same way. Fear of making things awkward. Fear of losing a friendship that already means everything to them. That's why this sign isn't really about awkwardness. It's about contrast. The difference between how naturally he talks and how differently he behaves the moment his own heart becomes part of the conversation. And if those quiet moments reveal what's happening inside him, the next sign reveals something even more important. Because when feelings grow deeper, many men stop trying to look impressive. They become much more interested in being useful. Number 4. He tries to help more than he tries to impress. When we first like someone, it's natural to want them to notice us. People tell better stories, dress a little better, try a little harder to make a good impression. There's nothing unusual about that. But I've noticed something interesting. As feelings become deeper, the focus often begins to change. Instead of asking, how can I impress her? The question quietly becomes, how can I make her life a little easier? That's a very different kind of affection. Maybe you mention that your car has been making a strange noise. A few days later, he sends you the number of a mechanic he trusts. You didn't ask him to. He simply remembered. Or perhaps you've had a stressful week at work. Instead of giving a long speech, he says, have you eaten today? Or, I'm already nearby, if I can help. They're simple gestures, nothing dramatic, nothing that demands recognition, but somehow they stay with you. I've always thought that genuine care often becomes practical, not because practical things are more romantic, because they're easier. For someone who's afraid to say, I care about you, it's often much less frightening to show it. Actions create less vulnerability than confessions. Helping feels safer than admitting love. Of course, helping someone doesn't automatically mean they're in love. Kind people help people, that's true. The difference is, once again, the pattern. It's the consistency, the willingness to show up, to remember, to notice, to quietly make your difficult days a little lighter whenever they can, without expecting applause, without keeping score. I've come to believe that real affection isn't always loud enough to announce itself. Sometimes it simply asks, did you get home safely? Do you need anything? Let me take care of that. Those sentences don't sound poetic, but they often carry far more emotion than people realize. Because love doesn't always speak first. Sometimes it serves first. And over time, those small acts begin forming a pattern that's difficult to ignore. A pattern where his actions quietly start saying something his words still haven't found the courage to express. And I think that's the clearest sign of all.
Number 5. His consistency starts saying what his words won't. I've saved this one until the end because I don't think it's the loudest sign. I think it's the clearest. When someone likes you, They can say all the right things. They can flirt, compliment you, promise they'll call, tell you how special you are. Words can be beautiful, but words are also easy. Consistency is different. Consistency asks something of you. It asks you to keep showing up, even on ordinary days. I've noticed something about people who are deeply invested in someone. Eventually, their actions stop feeling like isolated moments. They become a pattern. You don't have to wonder if he'll check in after your important meeting. He usually does. You don't have to remind him about something you've been worried about. He remembers. You don't have to question whether he'll disappear every time life becomes busy. He keeps finding his way back. Not perfectly, no one does. Life gets hectic. People miss calls. Messages get delayed. Plans sometimes change. That's part of being human. But there's a difference between someone who occasionally gets distracted and someone whose care remains consistent. I've always believed consistency is one of the quietest forms of honesty, because it's difficult to fake for very long. Anyone can make a grand gesture. Anyone can have one incredible day. But showing up week after week, month after month, without needing attention for it, that's different. Imagine this. You've had an exhausting week. You haven't been yourself. You haven't replied as quickly. You haven't had much energy to talk. You almost expect him to disappear too. Instead, he simply says, "Just checking in. I hope today was a little easier." No pressure, no guilt, no drama, just presence. Sometimes that's what love looks like before it ever sounds like love. I've heard people say, if he loved me, he'd just tell me. Maybe. And hopefully one day he will. Healthy relationships can't survive forever on unspoken feelings. Eventually, honesty matters. But before many people find the courage to speak, their actions often begin speaking first. Not through grand romantic gestures, through reliability, through showing up, through remembering, through making you feel like you're not carrying the connection alone. I think that's important, because love isn't measured by one emotional conversation. It's revealed in hundreds of ordinary decisions. The decision to call, the decision to check in, the decision to make time, the decision to keep choosing someone even when there's no audience watching. Looking back, I don't think the clearest sign someone loves you is that they never become nervous, or that they always know exactly what to say. Sometimes they're terrified. Sometimes they stumble over their words. Sometimes they hide behind ordinary conversations because they're afraid of changing what already exists. But even then, their actions quietly continue telling the same story. And eventually, those actions become impossible to ignore. Which brings me back to something I mentioned at the beginning. The strongest feelings aren't always the easiest to express. Sometimes they're the hardest. Not because they aren't real, because they're incredibly real. And that makes them frightening. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that genuine love usually isn't revealed in one unforgettable moment. It's revealed in countless ordinary ones. The small reasons to stay connected, the little details that somehow never get forgotten, the sudden hesitation when the conversation becomes personal, the quiet desire to make your life a little easier, and finally, the consistency that keeps showing up long before the words ever do. None of these signs on their own prove a man is secretly in love. People are complicated. Kindness isn't always romance. Thoughtfulness isn't always love. That's why it's important to look at the whole picture, not a single moment. What matters is the pattern, because patterns tell stories that isolated moments never can. And if someone consistently chooses to stay connected, remembers the little things, becomes vulnerable when feelings enter the conversation, looks for ways to make your life a little easier, and keeps showing up through both ordinary and difficult days, it's worth paying attention. Not because it guarantees how they feel, but because genuine feelings often become visible long before they're spoken. And the person who has been showing you these signs quietly may have been waiting for you to notice all along. So I'm curious,
Which of these signs do you think people misunderstand the most? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.